Today I'm working on another round of Kendra's Card Challenge 22 to make some masculine cards. Hey, it's Beth. Welcome. Today I am making another round of Kendra's Card Challenge 22. This time I'm using the Rugged Birthday collection from Not Too Shabby Shop. It has 24 designs and like very masculine patterns. Lots of greens and browns, grays. We've got, kind of outdoorsy, but not all of them have, are outdoorsy. Kind of some vintage patterns too. There's one design, so 4 pages of the same design of cut aparts. So that's kind of nice. Gives you some embellishments. And then here is the last set. So that's what I'm going to be making my cards with, because I did need some masculine birthday cards for my stash. So we're going to be using the Kendra's Card Challenge 22 PDF. Cutting guides. I'll be choosing my papers with you and cutting them down. And then, I don't know if it won't be in this video. I will do a couple cards with you assembly-wise in this video, but then it'll have to be a part 2 because it does get really long where I put together like all 15 cards. So let's go ahead and jump in, and I can kind of explain Kendra's Card Challenge as I'm going as well. So in choosing my papers, I know I want to save these for the cut aparts on them. But otherwise, I'm going to go through here and I'm going to pick 6 sheets of pattern paper. So if you are new to Kendra's Card Challenges, Cards by Kendra gives you a PDF workbook that helps you take 6 by 6 inch sheets of pattern paper and turn them into 15 cards. It's a great way to maximize your paper stash and get a nice variety of cards made at the same time. And there will be a link in the description box below where you can find out how to download the PDF. It is free to download. And we will kind of talk some more about that as we go. So I have 6 patterns picked out that I would like to use for my cards. I tried to find a mix of like some of the darker backgrounds and some lighter backgrounds. The nice thing is this is double-sided paper, so I do have the option of using the other side if I decide to do so when I'm putting the actual cards together. So the PDF itself, it has the cutting guides, your card sketches. There's a lot of helpful information on how to enter for prizes, giveaways, which we'll talk about here soon. Information about prize sponsors and just kind of tips for creating the cards using the cutting guide, etc. On this last page, you've got the prize sponsors, but you also have a chart which kind of breaks down Kendra's Patreon membership. So the PDF is free to download, but if you choose to support her further, you can join one of her membership levels and you get all kinds of amazing benefits from that. Probably the most popular being the archives of past quarterly card challenges. So this quarter that we are in is April through June of 2026, so quarter 2 of 26. And at the end of June, this PDF or this challenge design will go into the archives. And so if you are looking for past challenges, then you would like to sign up for at least the silver level, and you can have access to the challenge, the past PDFs as well. So I've chosen 6 sheets, and so then the next step for me is to determine which sheet is going to go with which cutting guide. I like to look at the cutting guide and see the size of the pieces that are cut with each cutting guide, because sometimes that's going to tell me what's going to be a good fit. I don't know that it really matters with these, but let's say the fish pattern, if there was one that has a bunch of tiny little pieces, this one's not too bad. But if you had a cutting guide that had a bunch of tiny little pieces, maybe the fish wouldn't be the best fit because you wouldn't necessarily, You might be able to tell that it's the fins of a fish, but if you're just looking at that much of it, like right there in between my thumbs, it doesn't really do a whole lot. So I do like to look at the patterns and kind of decide, oh wait, I've flipped them all over. Kind of decide which ones might work best for which cutting guide. So I will kind of look at these, like the size of the pieces in these, and then I also turn to this last page that has a chart that shows you which patterns, which cutting guide patterns go together on every card. So sometimes I will get an idea of how I want to like allocate these to the cutting guides, and then we'll completely change it if I look at that chart at the back. This one, again, I don't think it's going to be, sometimes it's harder. This one I don't think is going to be that bad. I might just not want to use the lanterns on C. So maybe we'll do the lanterns for E and F. And then these for, I think we'll go C for this. Maybe D. I don't know. So we'll try that. And then, like, for example, these are in order of how I would use them. So A, B, C, D, E, and F. And so if I look at this, it says that card number 1 uses A, B. You can see those would look good together. Same with card 2. Card 3 uses A and F. I think those are fine. 4 uses A, B, C, and D. 5 through 7 use just C and D. So there's not a whole lot going on there. So I might actually switch. So that gives me like a design, kind of a noticeable design, as well as a more basic. And then 8 uses C, D, E, 9, A, B, C. I don't know, I may want to switch one of these as well. I think we might do B, A, and F. So now this gives me a good mix of pattern types on all the different cards. So I don't have like 3 kind of just basic patterns together. I have some interest with an actual image, I guess is the word I'm looking for. So that's how this is going to be: A, B, C, D, E, and F. Again, if I need to, I can flip to the back side and use those. So now that I have them cut down, I can go ahead and, now that I have them assigned, I can go ahead and start cutting them down. To cut down the papers, I'm starting with cutting guide A, and I'm starting with the line that's marked with the scissors icon. And each one of the cutting guides has this, and it's like the first place that you can really cut all the way through the paper. And I'm pointing out the next lines that I'm cutting through as I'm working through the cutting guide. Basically, each section, I look for the next line that will cut all the way through that section. So it just kind of becomes a rhythm. Now on this like kind of upper left quadrant, cutting down these last 3 strips. And then one way that I stay organized is I have a set of baggies that are numbered 1 through 15. And after I cut each of the pattern papers, I reference the cutting guide and put the pieces into the appropriate numbered baggies so that when I go to assemble the cards, I have all of those pieces together. Now, there are different ways to do this. This is, how I work best. As far as the vessels, I guess, that you want to put your pieces in, you could use plastic Ziploc type baggies. You can use the cellophane bags that you put finished cards in. You could use envelopes. I have a hodgepodge of bags that, they were previously used on another product. None of them were ever used for food, but I do have some Ziploc baggies. I have some of the cellophane bags. I have some packaging bags. I just kind of used whatever I could find that were like of a decent shape. So real quick, just to highlight this piece that had the triangles cut, I line up the points of the rectangle on my trimmer and then put the blade down in the middle of that piece and then slide up and down so that you don't like bend or damage the corners. You'll see me do that a few more times, but back to organization. The main thing is to stay organized as you're doing this. It just makes it so much easier. If you have the space, you can also have piles, numbered piles on your desk for each of the card sketches, or you could label the backs of the papers. I even go so far as after I cut each piece, I kind of lay it out on my craft mat in the same order that it is in the cutting guide. So working through sketch C now, again, I started with a scissor and I'm just kind of working through each section looking for the next line that's going to cut all the way through. So here in this bottom section, there are quite a few triangles. So I'm going to cut this one into a square. And again, you can see I'm lining up the points of the square on my trimmer blade or on my trimmer channel, and then just run the blade through starting from the middle. For these tiny little squares that get cut into triangles, I am just going to use my scissors because these are so small. It takes so much longer to kind of line them up in my trimmer and hold them in place. So it's just easier for me to use my scissors. For this odd-shaped piece, the odd-shaped pieces at the top right of cutting guide C, I am just using my pencil and then the ruler marks on my trimmer and measuring like 1/4 inch down from the top on both sides, and then I line up those marks on my trimmer and cut through. And then that gives me those two angled pieces. Some other tips that I always like to give if you are new to the challenge is to use double-sided paper if you can, and if not, choose non-directional paper. The cutting guides do have arrows that tell you which direction that the piece will go on when it's on the card, but every once in a while you do still end up with like one piece, usually a smaller piece, that the direction isn't quite right when it's, from how you had to cut it and when it ends up on the card. For cutting guide D, so this one has a circle. So I'm going to take the strip, and it calls for a 1-inch circle. I tried my 1-inch punch, but it was going to be just a little too big. So I dropped down to a 3/4 inch punch. You can also use dies. You could trace something to make a circle that size and hand cut it, or just leave it square. You do have some flexibility there. And then now I'm moving on to the top section and starting with all of the pieces on the left first, and then I will make my way back to the top right where we cut those angled pieces. So again, I'm going to use my trimmer and a pencil to measure. I measure 1/4 inch from the bottom on accident and realized that it was going to be cut the wrong angle. So I do remeasure and do 1 1/4 inch from the top on both sides. We'll line up my pencil marks on my trimmer channel there with the blade and then make that cut. And then as I'm putting the pieces away, I accidentally put the wrong piece in the wrong bag and have to make that switch. So the cutting guide gives you, like I said, the arrows that tell you which direction that those pieces will go on the card. And also, I didn't mention this before, but there are numbers on each piece cut that correspond to the card sketch that it's going to go with. And that is how that's how I know which baggie to put my pieces in. And I kind of get all kinds of mixed up on this one. I don't know if my mind drifted or what, but I had to reorganize a few of the pieces into the correct baggies. So moving on to cutting guides E and F, these go so much quicker because there are less cuts, a lot of larger pieces. This is one of probably well, I guess I had the lantern pattern, but this pattern is definitely oriented. Like, it has an orientation to it, so I just made sure that when I made my first cut that the orientation, that it was facing up and that the orientation was correct. And now moving on to our final piece. I do have other videos kind of sharing more about the PDF and the cutting guides and how I choose my papers. So if after this one you feel like you could use some more help, I will have those linked in the description box below for you. And then Lynn and Kendra are also sharing videos of their kind of full process of how they choose and cut their papers and then assembly. So there's lots of opportunities for education on how to use the challenge if you need that. Get these last pieces put into the bags. And then I am going to be making sketches 2 and 3 with you today. And then we'll save the rest for another video. So stay tuned for that. So for sketch 2, I have these 2 strips, and then I went through my cardstock stash and used that cover sheet and tried to find some cardstock that would work with the pad. I wanted something darker and something lighter, so I went with kind of like that dark teal and then more of a beigeish brown, I guess, golden beigeish. I didn't want to do craft. It's more of a golden color in the pattern paper, so. And I've decided to do a card mat with that beigeish brown, and then the kind of inner mat that the sketch calls for with that teal. So when you're looking at the card sketches, each sketch has the measurements on it. So if you only want to make one card, you can do so just by referencing the sketch and cutting down the pieces using those measurements. And then the sketches if you have colored pieces on the sketch, they are usually accompanied by a letter, which means that they came from one of the cutting guides. However, you also have some gray, white, and black elements on the sketches, and those are kind of like your free choice. They're usually matting layers or maybe some extra embellishment pieces. And you can choose to use whatever you want, whether it's cardstock, specialty cardstock, additional pattern paper, what have you. So you do have some flexibility there. And I thought I wanted to use this fish, and so I turned the sketch horizontal and then realized I didn't really like it. So I am going to backtrack, and I'm going to turn that top piece back around because it was lanterns, and it needed to be, like, if I turned the card horizontal, then the lanterns weren't facing right. So now I can turn it back to the lantern side. And I'm going to fussy cut out this second piece of ephemera, and we are going to work with that instead. So you also have some flexibility in the orientation of your cards. You can, swap out embellishments and sentiments in the places that she has shapes, and anywhere she has a shape that's black or white or gray, you can choose to use whatever shape you want. You don't have to use what she shows. So I am going to be using the Happy Birthday sentiment from the Mini Messages stamp set from Not Too Shabby. This came out last year, I believe. And it's just great for like when you need small sentiments to go in you know, smaller areas, and there's a great variety of sentiments from holiday to just general. So I'm going to stamp, I decided to stamp it on a scrap piece first, just to make sure it's going to stamp well. And then I'm going to stamp this down, and then we'll kind of arrange those pieces. I decided to use one of the extra scrap pieces from the cutting guides at the bottom, just because I felt like it needed something a little extra. And the cards are A2 size, and my mat is 4 1/8 by 5 3/8, that brownish beige one. We'll add the turquoise mat down, and then I go to put this strip down and realized I like the fish side better. So again, the benefits of working with double-sided paper is you can mix and match. So I have kind of pivoted on this card several times already. You know, sometimes you get a plan in your brain or an image in your brain and then completely change it as you're actually working on the project. So that's how this card went for me. So I'm going to put this down, get this last strip on, and then it can work on embellishing that white panel. So for that white panel, for example, that is represented by a white piece on the card sketch, but you could sub in colored cardstock, you could use additional pattern paper, whatever you choose. And then I did still have in my stash some enamel dots from the Grit and Grunge collection. That was one of the previous masculine collections Not Too Shabby Shop had. And so I'm just going to throw on a few of those to kind of finish off my card. And then we'll be moving on to sketch 3. One of the fun things about Kendra's card challenges is there are always opportunities to win prizes. And so one of the ways you can have a chance to win a prize is upload a set of all 15 of your cards to the NLinks Party website. So on the very first page of the PDF, there are QR codes, 3 QR codes, and those link to like each month in the quarter, the NLinks Party. And so you can scan the one for that particular month that you are completing your cards in, scan that, it will take you to the NLinks Party page. You can upload your photo of all 15 cards and, you know, have a chance to win. And I've talked about flexibility in the card sketches. You do have flexibility in like how you orient, how you arrange things, but in order to be eligible for a prize, the cards do have to look similar enough so that they can be matched up to the sketches that they went with. So you can't like completely change a sketch, but you can kind of, you do have some freedom to work with the sketch pieces and maybe the arrangement a little bit. So I am going to go back to one of the ephemera pieces and fussy cut out this backpack. I've again used the 2 colored cardstocks. This time I kind of swapped which one is the larger card mat and then which one is the kind of like focal point mat. And then I did use cardstock for those tiny little strips that are on the sketch. Again, those are in gray, so you can use whatever you choose for that. And then for the circle element here, I am going to use a punch, and I'm just trying to figure out if I can use the 1 3/4 or the 2. So I ended up going with the 2-inch punch, and I'm going to cut that. I'm going to punch out the turquoise cardstock, and then with the white, I'm using a 2 1/4-inch punch. And I just had to find the size that worked best for the backpack. And then this time I am using the Happy Birthday sentiment from the Ultimate Sentiments birthday stamp set. And this has a coordinating die set with it as well. And so I will be using that to die cut out the sentiment and then a matting layer. I decide finally that I want to stamp it on white, and then we'll do a matting layer behind that. I kind of feel like I've been all over the place in kind of giving you information about the card challenge. I will have Kendra's video linked in the description box below where you can, watch her intro video if you haven't seen that already. Again, the link to her PDF will be in the description box below. I will also add links to any of the not too shabby products that I've used today that are still available. So add my sentiment down and then can go ahead and work on assembling all of the pieces of my card. Kendra's card challenges are just a really fun way. They are a challenge. Like I said, it definitely takes some organization, but you get like 15 unique cards, and you've maximized the use of 6 sheets of 6x6 pattern paper. And what extras you bring in are totally up to you. The matting layers, so you can forego a lot of the matting layers and do what you can with just those 6 sheets, and maybe some stamps or some stickers. So I suggest reading the tips that she gives you on the PDF, and then keeping yourself organized, and then just kind of work through it slowly. Don't rush into anything. Just enjoy the process. I usually like to get all the cutting done, and then I usually go through and do cut down all of the matting layers and figure out my sentiments and embellishments, and then have that all in each of the numbered baggies, and then just kind of sit down and enjoy the assembly process. By that point, it's like the hard work is done, and now I can just have fun putting all of the cards together. But everybody works through it, differently, so you find what works best for you, and then just try to enjoy. I've had a lot of fun working on her challenges, and I think this is my 4th set for KCC22. So that tells you that I do like to work through the challenges. Add my panel down, and then can add the embellishment and sentiment. I really like the teal on this one, like that. I like how it makes some of those lighter patterns pop. And I like that I can use white. I don't have to try and just use craft or cream or, something along those lines. So I wanted to pull that turquoise through up to the top since I have it in the sentiment, those strips in the middle. So I took a scrap, and I'm just going to cut a fishtail banner in it and add that to the top left corner. And then I like how that pulls the turquoise all the way through. And then this one is done as well. So here's a glance at my 2 finished cards. Again, please be sure to check the description box for all those links. Thank you so much for your time, and hope you all have a very crafty day.